I think we should get started. So with that, I will introduce myself and kick off the virtual town hall. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Erin. I work as the director for the Vermont Senate Democrats. We are so pleased to see the turnout tonight. Unfortunately, Senator Ann Watson isn't feeling well this evening, so she will not be able to join us. The good news is that we plan to host these virtual town halls on a monthly basis. And so Senator Ann Watson will be joining us for those future town halls. And if we don't get to your question this evening, there will absolutely be a chance to revisit that. We do expect a large volume of questions for the senators this evening. So please ask all your questions strictly via the chat function. If you have a question about the process of the forum, please also ask that via the chat. I will send out my email and the senators' emails at the end of the town hall for folks to follow up if we don't get to your question. We know that Senators Sanders, Welch, and Congresswoman Balint are hosting their virtual town hall starting at 6:30. So we will plan to wrap up closely to them. With that, let's begin. I would like to introduce Senator Ann Cummings and Senator Andrew Perchlik. Senator Cummings, do you want to start with introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm Ann Cummings. I'm the senior senator. I live in Montpelier. I have been in the Senate for a long time, and I chair the Senate Finance. So we have primary responsibility for property taxes, the education fund, amongst other things. And in the morning, I am on health and welfare, where we have responsibility for the cost of health insurance, or health care. Senate Finance regulates health insurance. So my two committees are in the center of an awful lot of the issues that are going on this year.
Thanks, Ann. And I'm Andrew Perchlik, one of your other three senators. Ann Watson won't be here tonight, as Erin said. And I live in Marshfield. I've been in the Senate for 3 terms. This is my 7th year. I'm on the Transportation Committee in the morning. So happy to talk about transportation, but that's not a really hot button issue this year. Although there are some, like a lot of things in Vermont, there's parts of the transportation fund that are kind of in crisis. But in the afternoon, I'm the chair of the Appropriations Committee, so working on appropriations issues. We just passed the Budget Adjustment Act out of the Senate today, and we'll be sending that on to the governor after we have a quick conference with the House. So could talk about those issues in there. Some important measures in the Budget Adjustment Act around housing, the long-term affordable housing, but also short-term housing for the homeless in the GA or the motel program. And we also did some other work to help the Human Rights Commission with more staff to deal with housing-related issues. And then also, it's not a lot of money, but a new position for the Solicitor General to hire another lawyer just focused on federal lawsuits to deal with the Trump administration's kind of illegal and unconstitutional action, so we can make sure we're jumping on lawsuits together with other states or ones that we lead, so we can try to protect the money that we have signed grant agreements with the feds with, so that we can make sure we get that money as we're legally entitled to. So that's my introduction. So we're hoping mainly to spend most of the time answering questions instead of just giving us our opinions. So I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there on many issues. So Erin will read out the questions, and then Ann and I will answer.
Okay. All right. So the first question is from Patrick Flood. He is hoping to hear from Senator Cummings about the status of healthcare reform legislation this session.
The Health and Welfare Committee is in the process of writing a mega committee bill. We've been hearing this morning, we heard from an expert from Yale on healthcare economics and the economic impact of a 1% increase in healthcare premiums. I think we're really focusing on giving the Green Mountain Care Board the kind of authority and making clear what that authority is to try and rein in the cost. We have one hospital, it's our major hospital, and it has the highest fee for service in the country. That's not sustainable, and we need to get it down. The cost of those increases have left us with an insurance company, our one prime insurance company that is not in the best of financial health. They've gotten the rate increase they need, and we're monitoring them very closely to make sure that they are able to be in a better financial position. And we also have several of our hospitals that are in shaky financial situation. We have our federally qualified health insurance clinics, which provide healthcare, primary healthcare to large sections of the state, are also in challenging financial straits. We have lost one home health agency, and so our healthcare system is under financial stress right now, and we are doing everything we know how to do to get that house in order. We've been working on that for years, but apparently with limited success. So I think we're going to global budgeting. We're going to be doing some much more rigorous monitoring and see how close we need to get. The last step would be price fixing, which nobody really wants to do. And we were told this morning that setting that price sounds easy, but when you start to do it, it is more complicated than that. So we are hoping not to have to go there.
I was just going to add, in the Budget Adjustment Act, it doesn't like fix the underlying structural problems, but we are adding $25 million in emergency relief for nursing homes that needed to stay open so we don't lose those beds. There's also $10 million in stabilization grants to FQHCs, the Federal Qualified Health Centers. Yeah, and then also there's some more money for some substance abuse care. So we're trying to provide some emergency funding so we don't lose some of that health care.
Great.
Okay,
So,
Aaron?
question?
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so the next question is for both of you. How are you both working to protect the Global Warming Solutions Act from rollbacks?
Want to start with that one, Andrew?
Yeah, well, we had a vote on the floor this week. Basically Republicans in the Senate proposed to take a bill that would repeal the clean heat standard and just repeal it. But the committee had only had it for a couple of weeks. Committee might discuss it and what other things that we could do to help folks that need help to keep their homes warm, increase weatherization, do other things as the committee wants. So the vote was clear that we're not going to pull the bill out of the committee, that it should go through whatever committee process the chair, Senator Watson, has for that bill. So it was a good sign that we're holding the line on not just ending these things because somebody made a campaign promise that they were going to end them. I know the governor's bill in the House, I've gotten a lot of emails and notes about a couple H bills that would roll back some of our requirements in the Global Warming Solutions Act and then the Heat Act. But those, are in the House, so we haven't dealt with them in the Senate, but I don't think they're gonna go anywhere.
I would just echo Andrew's statement that it was a party line vote. It was 13-17, which tells you we are very close in both the House and the Senate. We don't have the votes to override a veto. So that may have some impact on how quickly we can move forward. Because if we lose 3 votes, meaning they aren't there because they have the flu, or we have some disagreement, it would go to the lieutenant governor and we would probably lose it. But so far we are holding tight.
Okay, sounds like we're ready for the next question. So Deborah is wondering, she's concerned about the senator's support of the Scott/Saunders education bill. She's curious to know why the senators, particularly Senator Cummings, do not support income-based tax funding for education in Vermont.
I have supported income-based tax funding, and 2/3 of the people in this state pay based on their income. We had a summer study committee 4 years ago that looked at it. It turned out it wasn't as simple as it sounds, that moving income sensitivity up. When we do income sensitivity in order to pay those taxes that the individual isn't paying, everybody's tax rate goes up because it's a self-filling fund. And when we started playing around with numbers, we ended up having a negative impact on people that pay based on their property value, not their income. So these are lower income people primarily that have an even lower value home, probably a double or single wide in a park. So after that summer study, the report came out and said, if you want to do it, this is the way you would go about it. I would say everybody on that committee, myself included, wanted to do that. But after we heard all the reports from the Joint Fiscal Office, which is our nonpartisan number crunches, none of us put in that bill the next year. I've asked the Joint Fiscal Office, and I'm hoping by tomorrow I will get the numbers back, that if we put a surcharge of the same percent that people on income sensitivity are required to pay, if we put that surcharge on people making more than $500,000, how much money would we make? We might find out that we would make enough money to cover the cost of of schools, but nobody is really thinks we will. We have to remember we have one of the highest and most progressive tax systems in the country. Our high tax rate is up at the top. Massachusetts, in their surcharge, is held up to us. They are only paying 0.25% more than Vermonters have been paying for years in that bracket. And the House spent extensive time last year trying to develop a wealth tax, and no other state has done that. And we also found that it was very difficult to do. I think the question got down to, how do you value unearned assets, meaning stocks? Because today your stocks might be worth a lot, but if the market crashes tomorrow, and it's due to crash just in economic cycles, it might be worth nothing. And so how do you value something that could fluctuate that quickly? And so we continue to work at it. We continue to look at, to do it. But other states like Vermont do a mix of taxes. We do the sales tax, rooms and meals, the lottery, part of the purchase and use. And what's left is the property tax. And for people that have owned their property for a long time, like I have, it's worth a lot more than I paid for it. I couldn't afford to buy it today, but it's not a liquid asset. I can't really use it to pay my taxes or, go there. And we don't have alternative housing right now. We have a housing shortage, and we do not have starter homes or downsizing homes for people who are living in the family home, and they may not need 3 bedrooms, but there's a little house I always thought of as my retirement home at the end of my street, and it just sold for $460,000. So have we don't have the housing stock to, so that people that own that asset have a, a viable alternative, except maybe move to Florida. And we have a significant number of people in this area that are doing that as they reach their retirement years. They may come back to be close to family as they age and are ready to go into nursing homes or retirement homes. But you will see people that are moving out because it's warmer in Florida and they also don't have an income tax. So we're always kind of walking that line between being affordable for average working people and also having a fair taxing system.
Yeah, I'll just add, I basically agree with everything Senator Cummings said. As far as the governor's proposal, I wouldn't say I support it because I still don't know what it is. I mean, I know in general terms what the overall proposal was, and I supported doing something about the educated financing to address kind of runaway escalating property taxes. And, they are doing that, and they are engaged much more than they have been in the past, where they just said, well, you, the legislature, figure something out. And then at the last week of the session, they'd either say they're going to veto it or they would like it. So I'm glad that at least this year they're very engaged and in the education and finance committees to talk about their proposal. But we just got the language, I think, last Friday. I haven't had the time to look at it. So I wouldn't say I support it or don't support it because I don't really know what it is. I think they're kind of building it as they go. But I do think that we need something that makes the connection between budgets that are passed for schools and then what your bill is a much clearer process. Because right now, your school board could decrease the budget, but your taxes could go up, and the vice versa can happen. And I think that's a problem as well as just the high percentage increases of property tax that we need to figure out a way to bend that curve. I think housing is a part of it, as Senator Cummings said, and I do support switching to income if we can figure it out for some of the education spending. We basically have the income sensitivity part, and I think Public Assets has some good proposals to address that instead of just trying to switch, because they kind of agreed switching all the way over just to an income there's a lot of complications. And so, but changing the income sensitivity formula could be a way of moving a little bit more towards an income-based education formula.
Okay, so our next question is also housing related. The question is from Hannah Morgan. Do either of you have any plans to support or any stance in general on the village expansion project in Plainfield?
Nice, good.
I'll leave Andrew to that one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've been thinking about, hi Hannah, by the way. I think that it seems to me to be a great project. I'm supportive of it. I'm not a voter in Plainfield, so I won't get a chance to vote on it. But I think it is a creative way for people to come together and build, a significant number of units, and having the town support the infrastructure makes sense. And there are some statewide programs that will kind of help other communities. And depending on the timeline, maybe Plainfield could make use of some of this funding, whether they be low interest loans or help with the bonding, so that the wastewater and roads could be built so that the houses can be much more easy to build. And I hear that from other developers and from VHCB, if they could just get help with some of that basic infrastructure, it could make the housing units go up a lot quicker. And from what I've seen of the Plainfield expansion project, which I like to call the East Village project, is really smart and has a lot of input of the town, people from the town. And I like the fact that it's a mixed, you'll have some tiny homes that could be very affordable mixed in with kind of what maybe we might call just a normal lot that people might build a bigger house on. So I support it, and I hope that people at Plainfield vote for it.
And I will say, we have a shortage in our legislative council office, and it has been very slow getting bills drafted this year. I have requested a bill that would establish a housing TIF, which would allow towns to bond for the infrastructure, basically water and sewer, maybe some roads, and then you to build housing, and then use the income from that new housing district to pay off the bond. I haven't gotten that bill out, but I've been told that there are a couple of TIF bills that are coming through from the House. So they may be doing House bills first, because these are revenue bills of a sort, and start in the House and then come over. But we know, I mean, the demand is there for workforce housing, and the market hasn't responded. And the last 2 years I was on housing and economic development, we have done reforms to Act 250. We've, made it much, basically, you don't have to have any state or, Act 250 permit to build in your village center, your designated downtowns. But we are told that because of material and labor costs, you can't build a house for anything less than 300,000, and the average person can afford 250,000, and those numbers are probably all, well, at least the cost has gone up since somebody gave me those numbers. So if we can help and have the town put the infrastructure in the water and sewer, then that should allow builders to build your kind of basic prefab ranch house, that would allow people to either start out or to retire and move down and free up your larger, older homes. That's our hope. But we are working on it. It's top of the line.
And two other things directly related to the floods in Plainfield and the loss of housing there. In the BAA, there's grants to municipalities that had a certain level of damage in FEMA recognized floods. It's not a lot of money, but it'll be a little bit money for the town of Plainfield. And then also any abatements that they made, normally they would be held accountable to any loss of revenue to the education fund for an abatement to a property. But we have language in the BA that would hold them harmless. So any abatements that they made because of flood damage in Plainfield, the state will basically take the hit for that in the education fund and not have the town to pay that. So that takes a little bit of pressure off of the town. And I think there's about 30 towns that will get these small grants that had flood damage in 24. We did it for the towns that got flood damage in 23. So we thought it'd just be fair. The only wrinkle in that is that because of the money to extend the motel program that we have in here, or just that we're extending the motel program from April 1st, when they'd start exiting people to the end of the fiscal year, and July 1st, the governor's threatening to veto it. So if he vetoes it, we'll have to deal with that.
Okay. So on the same subject of taxes and housing, Chris Bradley is wanting to know, can you both speak a bit further to what about potentially implementing a higher tax rate on second homes?
That is also a bill I have requested and haven't gotten out. Um, I think as we're working our way through the proposals, we are told consistently by the tax department that it isn't as easy to differentiate a second home as it may sound. Um, we're between tax commissioners. Our new tax commissioner is just starting, and I believe I'm meeting him for lunch in another week. The two money chairs are the tax chairs, but we yeah, it's just um, more. It's we're waiting. We are short staffed like everyone else. We need attorneys to do the drafting. If it works in as we work our way through the governor's proposal, or what is now becoming a legislative proposal, we are starting to come up. I got the governor's proposal in writing today. It is 173 pages. I got it at 4 o'clock, so I haven't read it. They have been writing it as they go. They have given us this kind of an ideal school situation, and they have the ideal school and what the ideal funding would be. And now we are trying to work that into the Vermont reality and talk about, and what would it, if we did this, what would it look like in Vermont? I think if we're going to do anything, we may need to raise some money to transition. It cost us $100 million last year to buy down the property tax rate to only a 14% increase, 13.8, I think, which y'all told us was totally unacceptable. I think it's going to cost a similar amount of money this year. And that's, I'm looking at Andrew, somewhere between 70 and $100 million. We can't keep doing that. And so as we move forward, we are, we will in all probability have to raise some funding. And so that's where the second home tax may well come in.
And just, I'd support it. And I haven't heard of any senator that I've talked to about it not support it. I think even some of the Republican senators I've talked to feel like it's a good idea as a way to lower property taxes, as well as maybe discourage some of the homes just being used 2 weeks of the year because there's somebody's vacation home. So I think as far as support goes, it's there, but it's figuring out how the tax department actually does it and collects it and all those kind of things. But I'm hopefully we can figure that out, and that'll help with that question about the money to lower property taxes. Next question.
Okay. We are getting the question, is the legislature making plans to fight or respond to the actions of the Trump administration? For example, the significant reductions in Medicaid.
Yeah,
do that.
I mean, the only concrete thing right now is the thing I mentioned at the very beginning, which is the authorizing and a kind of an emergency position at the Attorney General's, Solicitor General's office for a lawyer, like, I mean, they're all good lawyers, obviously, but somebody that's experienced that can really help us with the federal lawsuits, joining other states, suing the Trump administration for money and programs that are legally ours. It's, we're not talking about future money. We're talking about money that we already have grant agreements for and promises for. The Medicaid, we don't know exactly, what they're going to do. I know the House and Congress did pass a bill, and Medicaid is one thing they're trying to cut. And if they're successful of getting that through the whole legislative process, which I think will be more difficult for them in the Senate, then it would be devastating for Vermont. And we would have a big problem finding that money to fill in for those costs. So I'm not sure what we would do, but we would find some of the money for the most vulnerable Vermonters and the most critical care, but I think there would be care that wouldn't be available if they were to cut all of it. But I'm assuming they're not going to cut all of it. But we rely heavily on federal funds for Medicaid.
I know that both the governor's office and the treasurer's office are doing assessments and talking about reserves and setting money aside. I think, what we would need, what kind of contingency plans. I think we're working through the education system, knowing full well that a stroke of a pen could tie any education funding to a voucher system, at which point we'd probably sue. But lawsuits are also expensive, and but we will. I think at this point, there's so much uncertainty and so much angst that in order to survive, we're just taking this one step at a time based on what we know and moving forward. And like COVID, if something hits, we will deal with it the best way we can.
Okay. Lisa Forbes is wondering if there is a plan to fund the PCB requirements in schools.
There is some new money in the governor's proposed budget. I want to say it's not anywhere near the amount we need, but something like $10 million to do the remediation of some of the schools that have been tested and tested positive. That's not enough money to do any more remediation on other schools that come in with positive tests. So it's a disagreement we've had with the House. The House has recommended that we pause testing and not do any more testing for PCBs. The Senate version is like, we really should know this, and it's not fair that some schools got the testing and remediation and some others, parents and children in those schools, are just told, well, sorry, we don't have the money, so we're not going to even tell you if there's PCBs in the air. So we're continuing with the testing program. We're going to put some money into it. Hopefully we can do more than 10. But right now that's what we have. And, there's some ongoing lawsuits against Monsanto to try to get some Fed money from them to pay for this, because they were the manufacturers of PCBs, and there's evidence that they knew the dangers. It's nothing to hang our hat on, but I think the short answer is we're doing some, but not everything that we think is needed.
This ties in. I was told that they had paused PCBs and their testing and remediation until the legislature decided what we were doing with schools. All of our schools, just about, are 50, 60 years old or older. I haven't heard of a school lately that doesn't have a leaky roof. Some of them are in terrible condition. I received a bill last year that said it would cost $328 million to take care of the immediate health and safety needs in our schools. We don't have $328 million to do that. And we don't have the bonding capacity to do that. At the same time, we're looking at the governor's proposal to do some consolidation. And so the question is, where do we put the money we have? Do we put it into perhaps fixing a school and expanding it so it can take more children in, which would be more economical? We spent this afternoon learning how the size of your student, even decreasing one student in a class, adds a significant amount of money to the cost per student in the education fund. And so we're working that through. We've had the treasurer in to talk to us about possible ways to finance that. But I think it's safe to say we're not going to, until we decide what we're doing with our governance structure in the schools, that we're probably not going to be able to sink a lot of money in to repairs, not until we know. We did find out that the only real significant bonded indebtedness in the state seems to be in Chittenden County, where I think they've got three major, well, we've got Burlington High School, and then two others, one in Milton and maybe one in Essex, but that the rest of the state, there has been virtually no bonding, long-term finance, mostly because the voters won't approve the cost. And so we have schools that just haven't been able to raise the money to do the basic maintenance that they should be doing. And that's a problem.
And I have to admit that my information that we hadn't paused the testing might be old. I was kind of before this session had started. So maybe with, as Senator Cummings said, with the big governor's proposal on education, they have paused that, but there is money there to continue it. So I don't know. I'd have to get more information to see exactly if they are still testing some of the schools that haven't been tested or are waiting on that. So next question, Erin.
Okay. So this is a climate question. Hoping, I wish Senator Anna Watson was here.
Who was here?
If you both have familiarity with Senate Bill 65, this is the bill that it proposes to amend the legislative direction of the PUC to require the energy efficiency utilities to prioritize greenhouse gas emissions reductions and equitable access for all Vermonters. If you're familiar with that bill, can you say whether you're willing to work to strike the language that allows for biomass? This person who submitted this question feels that biomass has been very greenwashed and that they believe biomass is actually more polluting and expensive than traditional fossil fuels.
Yeah, well, I disagree that biomass, and otherwise just known as wood heating, is worse than fossil fuels for heating. It's a different question if we're talking about for electric generation, where it's much less efficient. But I think we do want, at least I do want to support Vermonters heating their homes with wood. And I think it would be a mistake if we tried to force them not to, or to even encourage them not to, or to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. I think it's the cheapest way of heating our homes if you can do it. So we don't want to be in a position where we're telling Vermonters they shouldn't heat with wood. At least that's my personal position. My understanding of that bill, the language that is struck would be what this person wants, and that the language said that Efficiency Vermont would no longer be required to use some of their RGGI or forward capacity money to support advanced wood heating. Because right now they do offer an incentive of $6,000 for homes that want to install advanced wood heating, which is a high efficient pellet heating. And so that language, that bill strikes that language and says that you're only focused on, I think, greenhouse gas emissions and how they figure out greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know if the bill says exactly, because there's obviously debate on how you calculate that, but I do not support striking that language. I think Efficiency Vermont should continue that incentive, and I think it's a good use of incentives, and it's a good way to lower fossil fuels is to allow people to use wood. We should do heat pumps, and we should find other ways of heating our homes, but heating an old building, especially like some of these old schools, it's very difficult. I've just been working with the town of Reigate to try to heat their town garage and fire station. And they were looking at a ground source heat pump, which is more efficient than an air source heat pump. But the cost to do so and the cost of the electricity just did not make sense. And a pellet system for that just made a lot more sense. And so I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay. And the Environmental Committee is the one I have never served on. And so I don't have enough in-depth knowledge. I think this is, this is a bill. There's, I think, several changes being proposed for Efficiency Vermont this year. They have presently only been allowed to do reduce electricity usage because they are funded by a fee on your electric bill, and they have to demonstrate that they have cut so much electric use in order. That's how their funding for the next year is based, and there's talk about moving them into greenhouse gas. And I'm going to have to leave it to the committee, who gets to hear all the ins and outs and testimonies. But like most bills, there will be compromises in, this is still a democracy, and generally, nobody gets everything they want in every bill. It generally, you try and move us forward, and if you hold out for the perfect, you frequently don't get anything.
Okay. So the next question is from William Shore. William says, my understanding is that Stowe sends far more revenue to the state in school taxes than it receives. Current laws make it very difficult for Stowe to do anything to increase the amount of money that goes to the Stowe School District without incurring penalty taxes. What are both of your suggestions on how Stowe can receive a more equitable amount of funding for its schools? And what are you doing to make these changes happen?
Stowe, like Warren, like Woodbury, was, when we did Act 60, what was considered a gold town. Before Act 60, they have a wealth of second homes, and second homes don't send any kids to your school, so you had a lot of property tax value that you could tax and keep, without having kids impacting your schools. I believe some of those towns had like a 24, 28-cent tax rate. And we had other towns, Stannard comes to mind, that had a $3.28 tax rate. Supreme Court said, that was the Brigham decision, that is not equitable. That the state has the responsibility, and I know Alan Gilbert's on here somewhere, so I better make sure I get this right. The state has the responsibility for educating children. We delegate that to towns. We can choose who we delegate to, but it is a state responsibility. And therefore, every child has the right to equal access to a quality education. And they said they know money isn't necessarily the best way to do that, but money is about the only thing they could measure. And so when we did Act 60, we went through and we set up a system, and it is complicated, and it does remove people from some of the responsibility of feeling the impact of their votes. We set up a system in which every town pays into the state a, a set amount. There's a formula. It's beyond my math skills. And then we take the vote. Towns vote what they want. That money is raised proportionately from towns according to their property wealth. Used to be called the shark pit. Goes into this bucket. It gets redistributed according to a formula or an algorithm, but a penny in each town raises the same amount of money per student as in any other town. So yes, towns with a great deal of property wealth pay in more than they get back. Towns with virtually no property wealth get back more than they pay in. And then there's some schools that it's essentially a wash. They don't even have to pay in. They can keep what they have. That was the system that we're trying to work on. There's concern that you can vote to lower your taxes or to lower your spending, and everybody else raises theirs. And so you did away with something you really wanted to do, made some hard decisions, and your taxes still went up because everybody else's did. And so part of the discussion now is how do we make your vote on your school budget more directly connected to the tax rate you have or it creates. At the same time, we have to find a way to deal with Brigham. I am told, but my committee hasn't dealt in the governance. We've had some testimony on property wealth, but the bigger the school districts, the governor is proposing 5 very large school districts. But that in those districts, the property wealth overall per student is like 2 to 1. If you get down to smaller districts, it's like 10 to 1 ratio. So it is much more equalizing when you're raising funds. If you have a big district that has rich towns and poor towns, if you mix, a resort town with an essentially poorer town, maybe 3 towns up, or maybe 3 poorer towns, you get a balance in taxing capacity in that district. That's part of what we're working through. There is a desirability to that because we wouldn't have to go through the kinds of balancing we have to go through now. The governor also has a proposal that would guarantee, he calls it the state guarantee, but essentially the way it would work is the richer towns in a district, you'd adjust the grand list, but the richer towns would kind of pay into a fund that would allow the poorer towns to raise the same amount of money without having a greater impact on their taxes. So it's one of the problems that we're working through at this point.
And I would just say that it is an impressive amount, the amount of money that Stowe sends.
Yes, it is.
But it is the the Brigham decision that makes the equity argument that it does need to be shared. There are, I think the main point, which I said, and I agree with Ann Cummings, is that we need to make that connection between what your budget is for your local school and what your tax bill is going to be. And so depending on a lot of things that work out, it could at least be clear to the voters of Stowe what's happening. It's probably going to be, since the grand list is so large in Stowe, that you're going to be paying more in to help the poorer towns. And that's the condition of us all, of the state being it together and wanting to educate all of the children, no matter if they're in a property poor town or a property rich town, gets that education. But I think at least the general direction that the governor's proposal goes in, the folks from Stowe would appreciate that, at least that component of it. They might not appreciate the lack of local control that the governor's proposal is contemplating.
Okay. So the next question says, this is shifting gears a bit. Democrats got a majority or a coalition majority in every other statewide race this past election and in the House and the Senate. Will either of you help advocate for more clarity to Senate leadership that the legislature is an equal and not a subordinate to the governor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
we
think
do it all the time.
I think, I mean, maybe the question is based on some of the Senate leadership, inviting the governor to make a proposal on education, but I don't think that was saying that we're subordinate to the governor's position. We're fighting with the governor on the BAA around housing. The governor said, I want you to change it. And we said, no, we don't agree with you. We're not changing it. And now the governor is saying, I veto it. So we're definitely not, just doing whatever the executive branch says. But I think it was smart for the leadership to say to the governor, like, okay, well, what's your idea? Because in the past, it's always been the governor not proposing anything on all sorts of issues and just waiting to the end. So I welcomed the change of saying, okay, governor, give us your proposal. We're not saying we're going to go with it, but we wanted to have the governor engage as much as possible at the beginning of the process. And even though Democrats did do very well in other statewide races, and we still have a majority, we don't have a supermajority. So without a supermajority, or without convincing Republicans to vote for the budget or the yield bill with us, we're not going to be able to pass it without the governor's support. So as much as the majority we have, we could get us into a stalemate where we just don't have a budget. But I don't think that serves Vermonters. So we do have to work with the governor.
Yeah, I think that invitation was put out because the governor, as part of his campaign and as part of his backing in the legislative campaigns, was, well, I put out proposals and they haven't paid any attention to me. And, the implication was, well, if we'd done what he wanted, we wouldn't have the problem with property taxes. And in the past, we did listen to him. The first year we clawed back from schools, I forget how many millions of dollars in money that local voters had voted to spend. The second year we finally gave in on a statewide negotiations for teachers' health care. He doesn't mention that one very much because it's a leading driver in the cost of education right now. Both of those years, he vetoes the budget, and holds the budget hostage until we negotiate. If the budget is not passed by July 1st in Vermont, according to the Constitution, everything stops. There's no ability to have a continuing resolution like they're doing in Washington. There's no ability to borrow and keep up your essential services. Your schools don't have a budget. They can borrow, I think it's up to 80% of last year's budget to keep the schools open until they can get a vote. The state doesn't have that. And so the pressure to come to a conclusion gets to be extreme. I think this year, given the crisis, with the 18% increase in spending last year and the, whole crisis with property tax, we wanted to have the governor come out at the beginning, tell us what his proposals were, and the guarantee was we would consider them. I don't think any of us ever expected anything as massive a change. And they have proposed to us basically an ideal system. It is a system in one form or another that 47 other states use, which is a foundation formula where the schools get a set amount. There isn't a public vote on the set amount. You are given your amount, and then you can, and it's still open to discussion as to whether and under what circumstances you can raise more than that a set amount. It's still open. We spent this afternoon trying to understand what went into that base amount, and then your weights and your categorical aid like special ed and transportation is all added in. All their numbers are based on projections that they will have their ideal 5 district schools, and that their schools will meet what are national standards for both efficiency and high quality education. And so, but that ideal world probably doesn't exist anywhere. It definitely doesn't exist in Vermont. And so we are working through, as I was leaving at 4:45 this evening, I got a memorandum from the head of Senate Education, and they are looking at 10 or 11 districts. We've been looking at something very similar, divided up along the lines of the Vermont School Boards Association and whatever divisions they do. The administration used the superintendent's mapping for their, and they say, well, that's just for our ability to communicate on Zoom. But so I don't think we're going to end up with 5 districts, but we've got 181 right now. I think you're going to see larger districts than that. I think we will probably end up with some form of foundation formula, but all of that at this point is very fluid. And we're still crunching the numbers to see what it would mean. And then the governor is saying a 3-year transition. I think most of us think that's exceedingly optimistic, especially since we all know we are going to have to do some building in order to meet that transition. We did get a listing last Friday of schools and their capacity and how many students they have in, but we need to sit down and figure, and my committee, that really is in our jurisdiction, but until we get kind of the basics as to what districts are going, what the boundaries are, how many towns are in them. We can't really sit down and calculate what kind of funding and tax rate and building would need to be done in those districts. So I think before we go home, and having been there through several of these sessions, I am not making any plans to go on vacation in June. I think we will have to go home in July. But I think before we go, we are going to have to be able to tell you this is where we're planning to go. This is how we're going to get there. This is how the transition is going to take place. And there will be some unworked out details that some of us may spend some time on study work groups putting details together, because this is a massive change. It does work for better or for worse. There is consistent squabbles, lawsuits across the country. I think this year Wyoming got sued because it was felt they weren't providing an adequate base amount. We are working with the two national consultants that do these evaluations for schools, set up these systems, then reevaluate every couple years if you want, or you can set up another system or put an inflator in. We had that when we did Act 60 with the transfer from the general fund. There is an inflator based on inflation. All of those details are still being worked out. But the goal is, we need to be clear. We have one of the highest per pupil costs in the country. Our national rankings are slipping. The last one I read said Vermont used to be like in the top 10, and for some reason in the last few years it's dropped. When I was chairing education a few years ago, we had one of the highest high school graduation rates, but one of the lowest continuation rates, which means you go on to any other kind of training, which is really necessary to have any kind of a job that will allow you to support yourself. We have some issues. We have students who are their valedictorians, get green and gold, full scholarships to the University of Vermont. And in order to take those scholarships, they either have to know enough to take extra courses online, because their high schools don't offer the course requirements for them to get into UVM, so they can't use their scholarships. And we know some of our smaller high schools can't offer the kind of variation in courses that students need in order to go out into today's workforce. Every kid should be exposed to robotics. Every kid should be exposed to computer programming. And, the world of work has changed, and we need to make sure that every kid gets exposure. But if you've got 15, 10 kids in your high school grade, not class, grade, it's virtually impossible, unless you're a very rich town, to be able to provide the courses that kids need. So we're trying to find that balance in a small state with a small tax base.
Okay. So just a timing heads up, we are planning to wrap up around 6:30. So I think there's time for one or two more questions. We received a question from Deborah. Senators, are you familiar with the public assets and the Vermont Rural School Community Alliance proposals regarding education funding? If so, Both of these organizations have given alternatives to the governor's education finance proposal. Act 46, which consolidated schools, has resulted in huge increases in administrative costs.
Okay, I will say we have had public assets in. Um, I have a theory, which I think we all agree with, is that income in many cases is a better um, way to measure wealth than property, but that is not, there's winners and losers in every situation. We have looked at income and continue to look at it. I don't know what the Rural Schools Collaborative has. If they're out there, they haven't asked to come talk to us. They may well be dealing the um, with the governance committees, the education committees. We do know that the talk is there are schools that are small by choice and there are ones that are small by necessity. So we know we have some that are so physically isolated that they're going to have to stay small. And when we say small in Vermont, by any national standard, we are micro. Um, that, and that is impacting our ability to provide the best education that our kids deserve. So there's two goals here. That is to get the cost and the cost increases at an affordable rate, and B, to improve educational opportunities for every child. So those are the two goals. Just in my listening, I've decided Act 46, no, did too little. It didn't go far enough, and I chaired education when we did Act 46. It didn't achieve the um, change that it was hoped it would achieve. We thought when we merged school boards that the school boards would then decide to merge what we knew were not financially viable schools. We have told the governor's people, when we did that, the Secretary of Education had been out going around to individual school boards and talking to them about their financial viability on their own. And we have been told that the governor will be going out town meeting week and afterwards, and he will be talking to you. But he hasn't to date. We're told they did the Listen and Learn tour, but we're not quite sure that that's it either. So I think what we want, I don't think that there's any way you're going to see any kind of decrease in your property taxes. I think we're looking at 5 or 6% in the future or more, depending in many cases. We're seeing significant numbers of personnel being laid off. In some schools, I've got one that's laid off 20 people. We don't know who they are. That's not the best thing to do either, but that's really the only thing schools can do. We have to get health insurance and the cost of health insurance under control. We know that. We're working on it. This last year was a perfect storm. The cost of health insurance, the fact that after years of denying Blue Cross the rate increases it was asking, their reserves, which they are legally required to have, had reached dangerously low levels, that if and we are really watching flu and COVID season this year, because they don't, they don't have the reserves they should to deal with a real spike. There are backup insurances, so people
Yeah,
will
and
be covered. So, Andrew, go.
yeah, I just want to make sure we have time. But yeah, I know about the working as public assets plan and support it. I think one of the parts of the plan is moving things out of the education fund into the general fund, which I think makes sense for part of it, but it doesn't solve the problem of where you're going to get the money. You would then just basically have to raise the income tax or some other taxes. And I think it could be fine that we do that, but it's very clear the governor won't sign it. We could make a political point by sending it to him, having vetoing it, but without a supermajority to overrule it, we'd have to have a plan B on how we're going to do things. So I think it's been helpful, the work that they've done, but it isn't something that we can only work on that. So that's why we have to have something that we're working on with the governor. As much as some people don't like the governor's plan and don't like that we're working with them, that's the reality of the situation that we're in.
I think remembering last year that doing nothing is not an option, that people cannot, I've got a phone ringing next to me. I'm going to have to turn off my audio, but I'll leave it at that.
Probably Bernie Sanders calling you to get on his call.
Okay, I will wrap us up. I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us this evening. I'm planning to drop all three senators' legislative emails and my email in the chat right now.
I think you have to open, yeah, okay, there you go.
Yep, I just sent it to everyone. I'm also planning to send out a follow-up email to all the participants to make sure you get that. If we didn't get to your question this evening, please email me or one of the senators directly, and we will definitely get back to you. And please keep an eye on future virtual town hall meetings in future months. I'll let Ann and Andy wrap us up.
No, I just want to say thank you for those that are joining us and are still here. Hopefully we can do it on a more regular basis and questions.
That was Senator Sanders on the phone. We are going through a time of great change, and there's enough angst in people coming out of Washington. I don't think this would be the time we would have chosen to make changes, but circumstances are kind of forcing them on us. We are working on housing, we're working on healthcare, and we're working on property taxes, and they all pretty much hang together. And it's a complex issue. Nobody is going to be 100% happy with anything we do, but we're going to try and find the median road through the mess that we have out there.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron, for your help. It was great.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Aaron.
Worse. Okay, I think
Out.
we're all set to wrap up. I'm planning to end the meeting now. Hope everyone has a great night. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.